The sun was barely climbing over the jagged ridge when the dusty little town of Clearwater awoke to whispers. And those whispers were all about the Widow Harper and the challenge she'd thrown to every man with spurs on his boots. If you're a real cowboy, prove it on my stallion. It wasn't just any horse, this was Midnight, a creature as black as a moonless prairie night, a beast with eyes that glinted like shards of obsidian, and a temper as fierce as a rattlesnake in a burlap sack. They said Midnight had thrown 25 men in less than a month, each one limping away with broken bones, bruised pride, and a vow never to touch the reins again. Some swore the horse was part demon, born under a blood moon, cursed with the spirit of a warrior that no man could tame. Widow Harper stood tall that morning, her blonde hair tied back tight, her black riding coat hugging her frame like armor, the pearl-handled Colt on her hip catching the morning light. She wasn't looking for a suitor, though half the town's bachelors lined up at her door under the guise of helping her. No, she was looking for something else, proof that somewhere out there was still a man cut from the old cloth, a cowboy who didn't just wear the hat, but lived by the grit, the sweat, the danger of the land. Folks wondered why she cared. Some said it was because her late husband had been that kind of man, fearless, unshakable, the kind who'd ride into a storm just to see what was on the other side. Since he'd died 2 winters ago, she'd seen nothing but pretenders, men who talked big in the saloon but couldn't ride a wild wind if their lives depended on it. And so the challenge was born, whispered from the widow's lips to the ears of any man with enough courage or foolishness to try. That morning the corral was packed, townsfolk leaning on the fence rails, dust swirling in the air as boots shuffled and murmurs rose. The smell of leather, sweat, and horse filled the air thick as smoke. Midnight paced inside, nostrils flaring, muscles rolling under his glossy hide like coiled steel springs. The sheriff was there, arms folded, watching with a smirk as another cowboy, big, broad, and too sure of himself, adjusted his hat, spat in the dirt, and swaggered toward the gate. "Don't end up in the doc's office like the rest," someone shouted. But the man just grinned. He didn't last 10 seconds. Midnight exploded under him like a cannon shot, his back arsing, hooves striking the dirt with thunder, and in a blur the cowboy was airborne, hitting the ground with a bone-jarring thud. Laughter and groans rippled through the crowd, and the widow's eyes scanned the faces again, looking for the next fool willing to try. That's when he stepped forward, not with swagger, not with a smirk, but with a quiet, steady presence that seemed to hush the noise around him. He was tall, lean, with a face weathered by sun and wind, and eyes the color of the deep desert sky at dusk. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his gaze, and his boots had the scuffs of miles traveled on lonely trails. No one knew his name yet, but there was something about him, something that made a few of the old-timers lean toward each other and mutter, "That one, he's different." The widow's eyes met his, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, like they were reading each other's measure without a single word. He didn't step into the corral right away. Instead, he walked to the fence, resting his hands on the rail, watching Midnight with the kind of patience you only see in men who understand the value of silence. Midnight tossed his head, pawed the ground, snorted like he could smell the challenge in the air. The man didn't flinch, didn't speak. He just stood there, letting the horse get used to his presence, his calm like a slow river cutting through the noise of the crowd. Minutes passed, people shifted, muttered, wondering if this stranger was going to act or if he was just another dreamer frozen by the sight of the beast. Then, slowly, he unlatched the gate and stepped inside. He didn't rush, didn't grab, didn't try to prove anything. He let Midnight circle him, sizing him up, testing him. It was a standoff, not of force, but of spirit. And then, in a move that caught everyone off guard, the man took off his gloves, reached out, and touched the stallion's neck. Midnight flinched, muscles tightening like a bowstring. But he didn't rear. Something shifted in the arrow weight. A charge, and the widow's eyes narrowed, her lips parting just slightly, as if she was watching a ghost from her past. The stranger murmured something no one else could hear, and inch by inch, he slid his hand up to the reins. The corral was silent now. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He swung into the saddle with the ease of a man born there, gripping. With his knees, his body moving as one with the animal the moment Midnight launched forward. It wasn't gentle. The stallion fought like the devil himself, bucking, twisting, trying to send him into the dust like all the others, but the stranger rode low, loose, letting the motion flow through him instead of fighting it. Dust rose. In clouds, hooves struck like hammers, the fence rattled with the force of each lunge. But still he stayed on. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. By the time Midnight finally slowed, foam lathered his neck, his breathing harsh. The stranger sat tall, calm, as if he'd just taken a casual ride through the hills. He dismounted without a word, patted the stallion's flank, and handed the reins to the widow. The crowd erupted, cheers mixing with disbelief, and the widow just stood there, staring at him like she'd just seen something she thought had died. With her husband, name's Cole, he finally said, tipping his hat, "Your stallion's got heart. Just needed someone to listen." And before anyone could say a word, he turned and walked toward the hitching post where his horse waited, leaving the Widow Harper with the reins in her hand and a question in her heart she hadn't felt in years. Chapter 2 *. The days after Cole's ride on Midnight were different in Clearwater. Folks talked about it in the saloon, in the general store, even in the church pews on Sunday. Some swore he'd bewitched the horse, others said it was pure cowboy skill, but one thing was certain: he had done what no other man could. And yet, Cole wasn't hanging around to bask in the attention. He kept to himself, staying at the livery loft, riding out each morning before sunrise and returning long after the streets were quiet. Widow Harper noticed. She noticed the way he avoided crowds, the way he tipped his hat politely but never lingered in conversation, the way his eyes seemed to scan the horizon like a man expecting trouble to come riding over it any day. On the third morning after the challenge, she found herself waiting by the corral as he came back into town. Midnight was grazing calmly behind her, a changed horse, less wild-eyed, more trusting, almost like he remembered the quiet strength that had sat on his back. "You ride like a man who's got nothing to prove," she said as Cole dismounted. He met her gaze, the faintest of smiles tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's because I don't." She wanted to ask more, but the sound of galloping hooves interrupted them. A dust cloud rose at the edge of town, and soon a rider emerged, sweaty, panicked, and shouting before he'd even stopped. "They're coming," he yelled. "Riders gang. They hit a ranch out west, and they're headed this way." The name struck like a gunshot. Ryder was no ordinary outlaw. He was the kind who didn't just take cattle and gold. He took lives, burned homes, and left a trail of ash in his wake. Widow Harper felt a chill crawl up her spine, and she saw the same flicker in Cole's eyes, not fear, but something heavier. The sheriff barked orders, telling men to grab rifles, to get women and children inside. But Cole just tightened the cinch on his saddle. "You know him?" she asked, stepping closer, his jaw clenched. "We've crossed paths." The way he said it told her there was more, much more, but there was no time to pry. An hour later, Ryder's gang thundered into view, 15 hard, men with bandanas over their faces, rifles slung across their backs. They didn't stop at the edge of town. They rode straight in, scattering anyone who wasn't armed. Cole stepped into the street like a man walking into a saloon, calm, unhurried. Ryder himself, a tall, scarred man with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, pulled up in front of him. "Well, I'll be," Ryder drawled. "Didn't think you'd still be breathing, Cole." The town held its breath. "Guess you didn't try hard enough last time," Cole replied, his voice low and even. Widow Harper stood on the boardwalk, her hand resting on the grip of her Colt, watching as the two men sized each other up. Ryder's gaze slid to her, then to Midnight, and that cruel smile widened. "That your stallion?" "Lady, I think I'll be taking him." She didn't flinch. "You'll have to be a real cowboy to ride him." Laughter rippled through Ryder's men, but Cole's eyes darkened. "You don't want to try him," he said, but Ryder was already swinging down from his horse. He strode to the corral, grabbed the reins, and in one motion hauled himself onto Midnight's back. The stallion exploded, every muscle, every ounce of fury unleashed, but Ryder dug in, spurring hard, yanking the reins like a man breaking a wild steer. Midnight twisted, bucked, reared, but Ryder stayed on longer than anyone expected. Cole moved to the gate, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Let him go, Midnight." It was as if the stallion understood. With a violent twist and a leap, he threw Ryder hard into the dirt. Before Ryder could scramble up, Cole was on him, boot pressing into his chest, revolver drawn. The street was silent except for the ragged breathing of the two men. "You ride into this town again," Cole said, "and you won't ride out." Ryder spat in the dust but didn't speak. The sheriff's men moved in, guns ready, hauling Ryder up and disarming his gang. As they were led away, Widow Harper stepped closer to Cole. "I think I owe you more than thanks," she said softly. He shook his head. "Just keep Midnight safe." She looked at him for a long moment, then asked, "You're leaving, aren't you?" He didn't answer, just glanced at the horizon where the sky burned orange with the setting sun. She felt something twist inside her. Disappointment, maybe, or something more dangerous. "If you ever come back," she said, "there'll be a stallion waiting for you." Cole tipped his hat, mounted up, and rode out without looking back. The town watched until he was a speck against the dying light, and Widow Harper stood by the corral, one hand on Midnight's mane, wondering why a man who had nothing to prove had just risked everything for her. 2 months passed since Cole vanished into the horizon, and though Clearwater slowly returned to its rhythm of dusty mornings and quiet nights, there was an emptiness that clung to the Widow Harper like the echo of a storm long gone. Midnight roamed the corral, calm but restless, his ears pricking whenever a rider appeared on the trail from the west, as if he too was waiting for someone who never came. The townsfolk had stopped talking about the challenge after all. It had been met and bested, but they hadn't stopped talking about the man who'd done it. Some swore he was an outlaw on the run. Others claimed he was a former lawman burned out by the weight of his own badge. No one knew for sure, and the mystery only sharpened in the absence of answers. Widow Harper tried to busy herself with the ranch, with repairs, with early mornings and long rides, but no amount of work could keep her mind from drifting back to the quiet strength in Cole's eyes. The way he spoke to Midnight like the stallion was an old friend. The way he stood in the street between her and Ryder's gun without a second thought. Then, one gray dawn, just as the first hints of rain darkened the earth, a lone rider appeared on the ridge. It wasn't Cole. This man was younger, dirt-streaked, wearing a torn duster that looked 2 sizes too big. He rode into town at a dead gallop, nearly falling from the saddle as he reached the widow's gate. "You're Widow Harper," he panted. She nodded, heart thudding. "Message from a man named Cole," he said, fumbling in his coat and pulling out a crumpled, weather-stained envelope. She took it, fingers trembling, and as she unfolded the paper, the scent of dust and leather seemed to rise from it. The handwriting was rough but steady. "Hannah," it began, her real name. "One few dared to speak. I reckon trouble's not done finding me. Ryder's men weren't all taken, and the ones left have sworn blood. I'm riding to cut them off before they reach you. Don't come after me. Keep Midnight close. If I don't make it back, know that meeting you was the first thing in a long time that felt right. No signature, but it didn't need one." She folded the letter slowly, her jaw tightening. "Where is he?" she asked the young rider. "Last I saw, he was headed for Dead Man's Pass," the boy replied. That was enough. In less than 10 minutes she had her black riding coat on, Colt at her hip, and Midnight saddled. The stallion seemed to sense the urgency, his ears forward, muscles coiled. The boy tried to protest, but one look from her silenced him. The ride to Dead Man's Pass was hard and fast, rain turning the dirt to mud, wind cutting like a knife. She remembered every warning she'd ever heard about that place: narrow trails, sheer drops, and shadows that could hide a dozen gunmen. As she rounded a bend, gunfire cracked through the air, sharp and violent. She urged Midnight forward, the world narrowing to the canyon ahead. There, on a ledge above the trail, she saw them 5 riders closing in on a lone figure who was pinned down behind a boulder. Even at a distance, she knew it was Cole. Without hesitation, she drew her Colt and fired. The shot echoing like thunder, one of the outlaws fell from his horse, and the others wheeled in surprise. Cole moved then, fast as a snake strike, dropping to more before they could regroup. The last pair turned tail, vanishing into the canyon, their shouts fading into the rain. She galloped up to him, swinging down before Midnight had even stopped. He was bleeding from a graze along his arm, his hat gone, his shirt torn, but his eyes, those steady, storm-weathered eyes, were locked on hers. "Didn't I tell you not to come?" he said, but there was no anger in it. "You did," she replied, holstering her Colt, "but you should know by now I don't take orders well." For a moment they just stood there, rain dripping from the brim of his hateless head, their breath mingling in the cold air. "You saved my life," he said finally. "We're even now," she answered, but something in her voice made him shake his head. "Not even close." He glanced at Midnight, who stood watching them with calm, unblinking eyes, as if approving the reunion. "You still got that stallion?" Cole asked. "Always," she said, "and he's still not for sale." A slow smile curved his lips. "Good. I wasn't planning on buying him." They rode back to Clearwater together in silence, but it wasn't the strained kind. It was the kind that said more than words could carry. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, the rain had stopped, the clouds breaking just enough to let the evening light spill gold over the wet earth. Maybe trouble would find them again, maybe it always would, but for now, they had a stallion, a quiet road, and the kind of unspoken promise that only the West could keep. Chapter 4 Clearwater had a way of looking peaceful on the surface, like a calm pond that hid a snapping turtle just beneath the water. And in the weeks since Cole's return with the Widow Harper, the town wore that same deceptive calm. Folks nodded at them in the street, some with respect, some with curiosity, and a few with something darker in their eyes. Midnight had become a familiar sight, no longer the wild demon of rumor, but the proud stallion that followed Harper's every command. Cole worked quietly, fixing fences, helping the blacksmith, mending the widow's barn roof when the winter wind rattled it loose. He never spoke much about the trouble that had followed him to Dead Man's Pass, but Harper could feel it like a storm that hadn't yet broken. Then, one cold morning, Sheriff Dawes came knocking at her door with a look on his face that was more grave than usual. "Cole," he said, "we need to talk." The sheriff explained that a telegraph had come in from the east, word of a $500 bounty on a man matching Cole's description, wanted for a robbery in Carson City 2 years back. Cole didn't flinch, didn't protest. He simply asked, "Who sent it?" Dawes hesitated before answering. "No signature. Could have been a trick, but it came through official lines." The widow felt the heat rise in her chest. "You know Cole wouldn't," but Cole cut her off. "I've been hunted for things I didn't do before. Sometimes it's easier to ride away than fight shadows." That was when she saw it, the flicker in Dawes' eyes, doubt, or maybe guilt, and it stuck in her mind all day. By evening, word had spread faster than wildfire, and by nightfall, men she'd thought were friends were suddenly giving her and Cole a wide berth. The saloon fell silent when he walked in, and she caught whispers in the corner about easy money and splitting the reward. Cole tried to brush it off, but Harper knew the West well enough to recognize the scent of betrayal that was in the air, thick as gunpowder. That night, just after midnight, she heard Midnight's sharp, warning snort, pulling on her coat. She stepped outside into the cold moonlight and saw movement by the corral, 2 figures creeping toward the stallion, ropes in hand. She reached for her Colt, but before she could call out, a shadow moved from the side of the barn. Cole, silent as a mountain cat, revolver already drawn. "That's far enough," he said, his voice carrying like a whip crack in the stillness. The men froze, but Harper recognized one of them immediately. Elias Boone, a ranch hand who'd worked for her late husband, a man she'd once trusted. The other she didn't know, but the way he kept glancing toward town told her there were more waiting. $500 buys a lot of loyalty, Boone sneered. "And you're worth every penny, Cole." Cole's eyes never left them. "You'll walk away now," he said, "or you'll limp away forever." Boone's smirk faltered, but he didn't move. The tension snapped like a brittle twig when a shout came from the tree line. More men, armed, rushing toward the corral. Cole fired once, the shot splintering a fence post inches from Boone's head. Midnight reared, hooves flashing in the moonlight, as Harper fired 2 quick shots that sent the advancing men scattering into the dark. When the dust settled, Boone and his partner were gone, but the message was clear. They hadn't been after Midnight, they'd been after Cole. Back in the barn, Cole tightened the cinch on his saddle. His jaw set. "They'll be back," he said quietly. Harper stepped in front of him, blocking the door. "You run now, you'll just keep running. You think I'm letting you ride into the night without a fight?" He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, the wall of distance he always carried cracked. "If I stay," he said, "trouble stays with me." She reached for his hand, dirt and calluses rough against her skin. "Then we'll face it together." But even as she said it, she knew this wasn't over. The bounty was bait. The betrayal had started inside Clearwater, and somewhere in that quiet little town was someone who'd sold Cole out not for justice, but for gold. Dawn came to Clearwater with a sky the color of old pewter, heavy clouds pressing low as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. And Cole knew before the first rooster crowed that this would be the day the bounty hunters would be, coming not in 2s and 3s like the night before, but in force, and whoever had betrayed him would be standing somewhere close enough to watch. The Widow Harper saddled midnight in silence, her jaw set, eyes hard with the kind of resolve a person only gets when they've decided they'd rather fight and die than run and live in fear. By the time the church bell tolled 7, the first riders appeared on the horizon, 12 of them, dust rising behind like a stormfront, rifles and shotguns gleaming in the early light. The townsfolk peered from windows and doorways, some clutching their children clothes, others whispering wagers on whether Cole would still be breathing by noon. Sheriff Dawes stood on the boardwalk, his hand near his pistol, but his eyes sliding nervously from Cole to the approaching riders. And that was when Cole saw at the quick glance toward the saloon balcony where a figure shifted in the shadows. Elias Boone. The man didn't even bother hiding now. Cole stepped into the middle of the street, spurs clinking on the hard-packed dirt, the widow just behind him, with her Colt drawn and Midnight snorting at her side like he was ready to tear through anyone who came close. The lead bounty hunter, a scar-jawed brute named Carver, reined up 20 feet away, his voice loud and ugly in the quiet morning. "Cole Travis, you're worth 500 alive, 300 dead. I'm not picky." Cole didn't answer. He let the silence stretch until it was taut as a hangman's rope, then said, "You want me? You'll have to come through her first." He jerked his head toward Harper, who leveled her gun without blinking. The bounty hunters laughed, but it was a short, uneasy sound, cut off when Midnight stamped the ground and let out a piercing squeal. Then, faster than a rattlesnake strike, Cole drew and fired, the crack of his revolver shattering the stillness. Carver's rifle spun from his hands, and chaos erupted. The street became a storm of gunfire, dust, and shouting. Harper dropped one man clean through the shoulder, spun, and shot another in the leg before he could line up a shot on Cole. Cole moved like he'd been born in a fight, using the watering trough as cover, firing in measured, deadly bursts. Midnight surged forward, scattering to men who tried to flank them, hooves lashing like iron hammers. From the saloon balcony, Boone opened fire, and Cole dove behind a barrel as splinters flew. Harper saw him and, without hesitation, charged through the open street. Firing 3 times, one bullet punched into Boone's chest, sending him staggering back into the shadows for good. The tide began to turn. The bounty hunters lay in the dust, groaning. 3 more threw down their guns and fled. The rest wheeled their horses and thundered out of town, the echo of their retreat mixing with the acrid stench of spent gunpowder. Silence fell, broken only by the harsh breathing of the survivors. Cole stepped into the center of the street, smoke curling from the barrel of his Colt, his shirt torn and blood on his sleeve. But his eyes were steady. The townsfolk began to emerge, some in awe, some ashamed, and Sheriff Dawes' face pale walked toward him. "Looked like the bounty was a lie," he muttered. But Cole's stare froze him in place. "It was never about the bounty," Cole said, his voice low. "It was about flushing me out. Someone wanted me dead." He glanced at Boone's still body on the balcony. "Guess they didn't hire well." Harper moved to his side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "What now?" she asked. Cole looked down the empty street, past the fleeing dust, to the horizon. "Now," he said, "we make sure no one ever thinks they can buy this town's soul." And with that, the quiet cowboy who had come to Clearwater as a stranger and stayed as its shield holstered his revolver, took the reins of the black stallion, and walked toward whatever fight lay ahead, knowing the West never let a man rest for long.